There are places in England where history doesn't fade, it waits. And among them one stands silent still, Hollow Creek, a hamlet nestled in the chalky folds of Wiltshire, where the wind carries whispers through the barley and the church bell hasn't rung since the autumn of 1882. It was then, in the damp hush before dawn on the 23rd of October, that Elias Thorne was seen by the miller's boy, spade in hand, digging not one, but 4 graves in the family plot behind his croft. The boy, no older than 10, recalled the sound most vividly, not the scrape of iron on earth, which one might expect, but a peculiar absence of it, as though the soil yielded without resistance, as though it welcomed what was to come. By sunrise, the Thorne household stood empty. No note, no struggle, no trace of flight, only 4 fresh mounds, neatly squared. The earth patted smooth as if tucking in sleepers rather than sealing tombs. At first, the magistrates assumed tragedy of a common sort, debt, madness, perhaps fever. Elias had been a quiet man, known for his meticulous ledgers and his wife's haunting piano playing, which drifted over the fields on still evenings like a half-remembered lullaby. Their children, 2 girls, aged 7 and 9, were said to be gentle, bookish, often seen sketching birds in the margins of their primers. Yet something had shifted in the months prior. Neighbors spoke of Elias returning from market with strange parcels wrapped in oilcloth, of his wife ceasing her music entirely by midsummer, and of the girls no longer attending Sunday school. A postmistress in the next parish later recalled a letter Elias had posted in August, addressed to no one in particular, merely to those who might understand, though it was returned unopened, its seal unbroken, the paper brittle, with something dark and resinous that smelled faintly of myrrh. The first true disturbance came not from the graves, but from the house itself. Weeks after the disappearances, a surveyor sent to assess the property for auction reported an odd phenomenon. Every mirror in the Thorne home had been turned to face the wall. Not shattered, not removed, simply reversed, as though the reflections had grown unbearable. In the drawing room, beneath a dust sheet, he found the piano lid closed tight, its keys bound with twine. And in the nursery, pinned to the wall above the smaller girl's bed, a child's drawing, 4 figures standing in a circle beneath a moon with too many eyes, their hands joined, their mouths open in silent song. The paper was cold to the touch, he claimed, colder than the October air outside. These details, scattered and seemingly trivial, might have faded into local folklore had they not caught the attention of Dr. Alistair Finch, a lecturer in moral philosophy at Cambridge with a quiet obsession for anomalous grief. Finch, himself recently widowed, became fixated on the Thornes after reading a brief mention in a provincial gazette. He visited Hollow Creek in the spring of 1884, lodging with the rector, who reluctantly granted him access to Elias's remaining papers, mostly agricultural accounts, but also a slim journal kept in a cipher of Elias's own devising. With patience and the help of Elias's sister, long estranged but still alive in Bath, Finch deciphered fragments. The entries grew increasingly elliptical. References to the pact beneath the yew, to keeping the song alive, to the breath that must not cease. Most chilling was a passage dated October 20th. They hear it now. Not as I did, but clearer. Clara says the walls hum at dusk. Eleanor asks if the dead can sing back. Finch's inquiries deepened into obsession. He tracked down the miller's boy, now apprenticed in Salisbury, who swore he'd heard singing from the Thorne croft the night before the graves were dug. Not human voices, but something thinner, like reeds trembling in a hollow. He interviewed the blacksmith, who recalled Elias ordering 4 iron and clasps for coffins that were never built. He even unearthed a forgotten parish record noting that Elias's great-grandfather had been excommunicated in 1791 for unorthodox rites concerning the preservation of familial essence. Finch began to suspect not murder, but something far stranger, a voluntary entombment enacted not in despair, but in devotion. The graves, he theorized, were not tombs but vessels, sealed chambers meant to contain not bodies, but presence, His final discovery came in the form of a music box, buried beneath the hearthstone during a later renovation of the croft. It was small brass, tarnished green with age, and within it a cylinder etched with a melody no one recognized. When wound, it played a tune both simple and unnerving, a descending scale that seemed to hover just below the threshold of hearing, as though designed not for ears but for bones. Finch transcribed the notes, comparing them to folk airs, liturgical chants, even bird calls. Nothing matched. Yet neighbors who heard it played once in the rectory claimed it stirred memories they couldn't place, of childhood rooms at twilight, of voices calling from just beyond the garden gate. Finch himself grew gaunt, his lectures faltering, his letters to colleagues growing sparse and strange. In his last known journal entry, dated March 1886, he wrote, "They are not gone. They are listening." And the song, it requires an audience. He vanished that same month, leaving behind only his notes and the music box, which now resides in a locked cabinet at the Wiltshire County Archives. Its key long misplaced. Today, Hollow Creek is little more than a bend in a forgotten lane. The Thorne croft, overgrown with nettles and elder. The graves remain, though no stone marks them. Only a slight depression in the earth, ringed by yew saplings that refuse to grow beyond waist height. Locals avoid the place after dusk, not out of fear, but out of a quiet, inherited respect, as one might avoid disturbing sleepers. On certain still nights, when the mist curls low over the creek, it is said that if one stands very quietly near the old hedgerow, one might hear it, not a voice, not a cry, but the faintest resonance, like a piano string trembling long after the key has been released. And sometimes, just before dawn, the earth near the yews gives off a warmth that no frost can touch, a breath perhaps, or the echo of a vow kept beyond the reach of time. There are those who claim the past is a country we cannot revisit, yet in Hollow Creek, the past does not lie buried. It breathes. Decades after Dr. Finch's disappearance, his notes resurfaced among the effects of a retired archivist in Exeter, tucked inside a volume of Blake's prophetic works, its margins annotated in a hand grown increasingly tremulous. These pages, yellowed and faintly scented with lavender and damp paper, revealed the final phase of his inquiry, a growing conviction that the Thornes had not merely sought to preserve their unity beyond death, but to enact a form of what he termed resonant immortality, a belief, drawn perhaps from obscure folk theology or private revelation, that familial bonds, if sealed in perfect silence and symmetry, might resist the dissolution that time imposes on all things. He cited obscure references to the still house in West Country ballads, to rituals wherein the living would lie with the dead for 3 nights to tune the soul to the same key, and to the curious fact that in every known photograph of the Thorne family, 2 daguerreotypes and a carte de visit, their eyes never quite meet the lens, as though they were listening to something just outside the frame. Finch's obsession led him to reconstruct the final days with forensic tenderness. From parish records and shop ledgers, he pieced together that in the week before the disappearances, Elias purchased beeswax candles, unbleached linen, and a quantity of quicklime, not for sanitation, as one might assume, but Finch speculated, for sealing. Lime, he noted in a marginalia bordered with faint musical staves, was used in ancient rites to fix the spirit in place, preventing it from wandering or fraying into the ether. More telling was the testimony of a traveling tinker who had stopped at the croft on the evening of October 21st. The man, interviewed by Finch in a workhouse infirmary, recalled that the house was lit only by a single candle in the upstairs window. Though all doors were shut tight against the chill, he heard no voices, only a low rhythmic hum, like bees in a wall, he said, that seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. When he knocked, no one answered, yet he swore the hum paused, just for a moment as if listening. The true turning point in Finch's understanding came not from documents, but from sound. In the attic of the rectory, wrapped in oilskin and tied with faded ribbon, He discovered a wax cylinder recording, remarkable for its time, made by the rector himself in late October 1882. For the sake of posterity, though God forgive me for tempting it, the rector, an amateur phonographer, had placed his Edison machine near the croft fence one moonless night, hoping to capture evidence of trespass or animal disturbance. What it captured instead defied explanation. For the first 12 minutes, only wind and the creak of branches. Then faintly, a melody, identical to that of the music box, yet richer, layered, as though sung by multiple voices in close harmony, though no words could be discerned. Most unnerving was the acoustic anomaly noted by Finch. The voices did not diminish with distance, as sound should, but seemed to emanate from the very air around the listener, as if the recording had captured not a performance, but a condition of the atmosphere itself. The rector, in his accompanying note, wrote that after playing the cylinder once, he could not bring himself to wind it again, for the silence that followed was no longer empty, but occupied. Finch, however, played it repeatedly, transcribing each variation, each subtle shift in timbre. He began to sleep less, to speak in half sentences, to stare at mirrors as though expecting someone to step out from behind his own reflection. His correspondence reveals a mind teetering between scholarly rigor and visionary dread. In a letter to the Royal Anthropological Institute, never sent, he proposed that certain families, under extreme emotional duress, might unconsciously generate what he called acoustic ghosts, persistent sonic imprints of their inner life, capable of outlasting flesh. The Thornes, he argued, had not died in the conventional sense. They had tuned themselves to a frequency so pure, so internally coherent, that they had slipped the ordinary bounds of mortality, becoming less bodies than echoes held in perfect suspension. The graves, then, were not burial sites, but resonating chambers, carefully constructed to amplify and contain the family's collective hum. His final days were spent not in libraries, but in the croft itself, sleeping in the empty house with the music box on his chest. Villagers reported seeing lamplight flicker in the upper windows long after he should have left. One farmhand claimed to have heard piano notes one November evening, though the instrument had been removed months prior. When Finch failed to return to Cambridge for the winter term, a search party found the house immaculate, his bed neatly made, his journal open to a final entry that read only, "They are not beneath the earth. They are in the spaces between." His coat was found folded on the back step, and beside it a single beeswax candle burned down to a nub. Its wax pooled in the shape of a ring. In the centuries since, Hollow Creek has known no violence, no further tragedy, only a quiet, persistent strangeness. The croft changed hands several times, but no tenant stayed longer than a season. One reported that all clocks in the house stopped at 4:17 a.m. Another claimed the scent of lavender and damp earth clung to the air, regardless of weather. In 1937, during a drought, a surveyor mapping the land noted that the 4 grave mounds remained inexplicably moist, while the surrounding soil cracked and parched. Most recently, in 1978, a local historian attempting to photograph the site found her film consistently fogged, the images showing only blurred concentric circles like ripples on still water, and still, on certain nights, always when the moon is waning and the wind still, the air near the yew trees carries that faint, wordless harmony. Those who hear it do not speak of ghosts or curses, but of a profound, melancholy longing, as though the song itself were searching for a listener worthy of its secret. It does not frighten. It invites, and in that invitation lies the true horror, not of death, but of being left behind, of hearing the music fade because one's own heart has grown too loud, too discordant to join in. Today, if you walk the lane to Hollow Creek at dawn, you may find the grass near the old croft damp with dew, though the fields around are dry. And if you pause, very still, you might feel it. Not a sound, but a vibration in the soles of your feet, a resonance rising from the earth like a held breath. It is the echo of a family who chose to vanish, not into silence but into song, and who, in their perfect unity, may still be waiting for the world to learn the tune. There are silences in England that are not empty but full, saturated with the weight of things unsaid, unburied, unresolved. Hollow Creek, for all its quietude, has never been silent in that truest sense. Rather, it hums, not with insects or wind, but with a presence so finely woven into the fabric of the place that even those who dismiss the tale as melancholy fancy often find themselves lingering too long at its edge, as though drawn by a gravity not of earth, but of memory. In the decades following Dr. Finch's vanishing, the story of the Thorne family receded into the realm of regional anecdote. Whispered over tea in vicarages or cited in footnotes of obscure treatises on rural superstition. Yet the phenomenon itself did not fade. If anything, it deepened, acquiring a subtlety that rendered it all the more unnerving. Not a ghostly apparition or a scream in the night, but a disturbance of perception, a slippage in the ordinary rhythm of things that left witnesses unsettled without knowing why. It was this very quality, the horror of the almost imperceptible, that drew Eleanor Vane to Hollow Creek in the autumn of 1923. A folklorist by training and temperament, Vane had spent her career documenting the liminal spaces where belief and experience blur. The Cornish fisherwives who spoke to drowned husbands in the crash of waves. The Yorkshire shepherds who marked certain stones as listening places. The Devon widows who kept their parlours warm for decades in case he returns cold. She was not a believer in spirits, nor a skeptic in the modern sense. She understood that truth often resides not in fact or fiction, but in the tremor between them. Her interest in the Thornes was piqued not by the graves, but by the music, the persistent reports of melody without source, of harmony without singers. To Vane, this suggested not supernatural intervention, but a cultural artifact of profound psychological significance, a family's final act of cohesion, encoded in sound and preserved by the landscape itself. Her investigation began in the Wiltshire County Archives, where she uncovered Finch's sealed box, long overlooked, its contents deemed of no evidentiary value by a clerk in 1901. Inside, alongside the music box and transcribed notes, she found something new, a small leather-bound notebook, its pages interleaved with pressed flowers, yew-berries, lavender and a sprig of wintergreen, all brittle but intact. The handwriting was Elias Thorne's, though unlike his ledgers, these entries were lyrical, almost devotional. He wrote of the tuning of the house, of aligning windows to catch the dawn in precise quadrants, of lining the children's beds with layers of unbleached wool to muffle the outer noise and amplify the inner song. Most striking was a passage dated October 18th. Clara says the walls answer when she hums. Eleanor claims the moonlight on the floor is shaped like our hands joined. Martha hears the piano even when it is closed. I tell them this is grace, that we are becoming one breath. There was no mention of illness, despair, or external threat, only a gathering intensity of shared perception, as though the family were retreating not from the world, but into a deeper layer of it. Vane visited the croft in late October, the same week the Thornes had vanished 41 years prior. The house stood roofless, its timbers silvered by rain and time, yet the yew circle around the graves remained unnaturally dense, its branches interlaced overhead like a vaulted chapel. She camped in a nearby shepherd's hut, returning each evening with a phonograph and a set of blank wax cylinders. On her third night, the air still and cold, she placed the machine near the largest grave and waited. At precisely 4:17 a.m., the hour Finch's coat had been found, the air grew thick, not with sound, but with a pressure as though the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. Then faintly, the melody began, not from any direction, but from everywhere at once, a harmonic lattice of tones that seemed to vibrate in her teeth, her ribs, the marrow of her bones. She recorded it. Though she knew no playback could capture its true nature, it was not heard, but felt. a resonance that bypassed the ear and spoke directly to the body's memory of belonging. What Vane discovered in the weeks that followed reshaped her understanding entirely. Consulting old tithe maps and estate records, she traced the Thorne lineage not to madness, but to a forgotten branch of the Quietist movement, a 17th century sect that believed salvation lay not in action or prayer, but in perfect stillness of soul, a state wherein the individual dissolved into divine unity. Elias's great-grandfather, it turned out, had not merely been excommunicated. He had been the keeper of a suppressed doctrine, that familial love, if cultivated in absolute seclusion and mutual attunement, could become a vessel for eternal presence. The pact beneath the yew was not a curse, but a covenant, a vow to remain together beyond the fracture of death by synchronizing their final breaths and sealing their essence in earth shaped like a cradle. The graves were not tombs, but wombs. This revelation led Vane to a chilling conclusion. The Thornes had not been buried alive in the literal sense, but had entered a state of voluntary suspension, a shared trance so profound that their bodies, though interred, never truly ceased to resonate. The quicklime, the linen, the reversed mirrors, all were part of a ritual architecture designed to contain and reflect their collective consciousness inward, creating a closed loop of perception that time could not erode. And the music? It was not a ghostly echo, but the ongoing hum of that loop, still vibrating, still waiting for a listener whose own inner frequency might align with theirs. Vane never published her findings. In her private journals, she wrote that to do so would be to break the silence that sustained them, to turn sacred resonance into spectacle. Instead, she returned to Hollow Creek every October for the rest of her life, always alone, always at dawn. Friends noted a change in her. She spoke less, moved with a quiet deliberation, and kept her rooms unnaturally still, as though afraid to disturb something listening. In her final years, she claimed to hear the melody not only at Hollow Creek, but in the creak of floorboards, in the sigh of steam from her kettle, even in the pause between heartbeats. She died in 1956, seated in her armchair, a half-knitted scarf in her lap, her face peaceful. On her desk lay a single sheet of music, the Thorne melody, transcribed not in notes, but in a spiral of ink that coiled inward like a shell. The croft remains, though the county has long since ceased attempts to sell it. The land is listed as uninhabitable due to structural instability, though engineers find no fault in the soil. Visitors are few, but those who come often report the same sensations, a sudden warmth in the shade, the scent of lavender on windless days, the uncanny feeling of being gently observed, not with malice, but with patient expectation. In 1991, a team from the BBC, researching a documentary on English folklore, set up audio equipment near the graves. Their recording captured nothing unusual until playback, when technicians noticed a sub-harmonic frequency embedded beneath the ambient noise, imperceptible to the ear but visible on the spectrogram. 4 overlapping waveforms, perfectly in phase, repeating in a loop that never decayed. They erased the tape, unsettled not by what they heard, but by what they felt afterward, a profound loneliness, as though they had brushed against a unity so complete it rendered ordinary life unbearably fragmented. And so, Hollow Creek endures, not as a sight of horror, but of haunting beauty, a testament to the lengths to which love, in its most desperate and devoted form, will go to defy separation. The graves are not markers of death, but thresholds. The song is not a lament, but an invitation. And on certain mornings, when the mist lies low and the world is hushed, if you stand very still near the yews, you may feel it, not a voice calling you down, but a harmony rising up, asking only that you listen. And in listening, remember that to be alone is the truest death, and that some families, even in earth, refuse to let go. The final proof, if proof is needed, lies not in records or recordings, but in the silence that follows the song. For those who have heard it, that silence is never empty again. It is filled with the echo of hands joined, of breaths synchronized, of a promise kept not in words, but in the very air we breathe. A quiet, enduring hum that says simply, we are still here, together. There are thresholds in the English countryside that do not announce themselves with ruin or warning, but with a stillness so complete it feels like trespass. Hollow Creek, long dismissed as a footnote in the annals of rural melancholy, has in recent decades drawn a different sort of pilgrim, not the curious tourist or the skeptical journalist, but those who arrive already half listening, as though summoned by a frequency only the grieving can hear. Among them was Dr. Lionel Petherbridge, a retired acoustician from Imperial College, who in the winter of 2003 arrived with a suitcase of digital recorders, spectral analyzers, and a quiet desperation that those who knew him later described as the look of a man trying to tune a radio to a voice he'd lost. His wife, Miriam, had died 2 years prior, and in her final months, she had spoken often of a dream in which her childhood family, long scattered by time and distance, sat together in a sunlit room, humming a tune she could never recall upon waking. Petherbridge, a man of precision and waveforms, had spent his life measuring sound. In his widowhood, he sought not to measure, but to find. His arrival in Hollow Creek coincided with an unseasonable thaw, the kind that softens the earth just enough to make footprints linger. He took lodgings in the nearest village, but spent his nights at the croft, setting up microphones in concentric rings around the U-circle, calibrating them to capture infrasound, frequencies below human hearing that can nonetheless stir unease, nausea, even visions. What he recorded defied conventional explanation. The ambient noise of the site, wind, distant traffic, the rustle of small creatures, was present, yet overlaid with a persistent harmonic drone that exhibited none of the decay expected of natural sound. Instead, it maintained a steady amplitude, as though powered by an internal source. More perplexing was its structure, 4 distinct tonal layers, each slightly detuned from the others, creating a phenomenon known as beating, a pulsation that mimics the rhythm of a resting human heart. When played through bone conduction headphones, the effect was profound. Listeners reported a sensation of being gently enveloped, as though wrapped in a shared breath. Petherbridge's notes, later donated to the Folklore Society, reveal a mind oscillating between scientific rigor and something approaching reverence. He ruled out geological resonance, electromagnetic interference, and even the possibility of hidden speakers, none of which could account for the signal's temporal consistency or its responsiveness to human presence. For it was only when someone stood within the U-circle that the melody emerged in full. Otherwise, the recording captured only the faintest hum. This led him to a radical hypothesis. The phenomenon was not merely acoustic, but interactive, a residual field of consciousness preserved in the architecture of the graves and activated by attention. The Thornes, he wrote, had not merely died together. They had encoded their togetherness into the very physics of the place, creating what he termed a mnemonic resonance, a memory that sings. His most startling discovery came not from technology, but from memory itself. While reviewing archival photographs of the Thorne family, he noticed a detail previously overlooked. In every image, the subject stood in a precise geometric formation, a diamond shape, with Elias at the apex, his wife at the base, and the 2 girls at the lateral points. When he mapped this configuration onto the grave sites, the alignment was exact. Even more uncanny, when he placed sensors at these 4 points and triggered a low-frequency pulse, the returning echo formed a standing wave that reinforced the original melody, amplifying it tenfold. It was as though the earth itself had been tuned like a stringed instrument, and the family's final act had been to pluck it once and let it ring forever. Petherbridge did not leave Hollow Creek. In the spring of 2004, his equipment was found neatly packed, his notebooks stacked on a flat stone near the largest grave. His car remained parked at the lane's end, keys in the ignition. The only trace of him was a single digital file left open on his laptop, labeled Final Listening. It contained no voice, no image, only a 47-second audio clip of the Thorne melody, followed by 13 seconds of silence so absolute that audio engineers later confirmed it registered below the noise floor of the device itself. In that silence, they said, it felt as though the microphone had been unplugged from the world. Since then, Hollow Creek has entered a new phase, not of obscurity, but of quiet guardianship. The local council, weary of sensationalism, erected a modest gate with a plaque reading, "Private land, respect the stillness," though no owner has claimed it in over a century. Yet the site is never truly alone. On the morning of October 23rd each year, fresh lavender is found laid at the base of the central yew, never purchased from local shops, never traced to a hand. Walkers report that compasses spin erratically within 50 yards of the graves, not from magnetic anomaly, but as though direction itself loses meaning there. And always the song persists, not loud, not demanding, but present, like the memory of a lullaby, half recalled in waking. What remains most unsettling is not the supernatural, but the human truth at the core of it all, the unbearable weight of separation, and the lengths to which love will go to defy it. The Thornes did not flee death, they redefined it. In a world that prizes individuality, they chose unity so absolute it transcended biology. Their graves are not monuments to loss, but to refusal, the refusal to be unmade by time, to let go of the hands that held them. And perhaps that is the true haunting, not that they are still there, but that we are not. On a recent October dawn, a young woman, name unknown, was seen sitting cross-legged in the yew circle, eyes closed, palms resting on the damp earth. She remained for hours, unmoving, until the mist lifted and the first light touched the graves. When asked later by a passing farmer what she had heard, she simply smiled and said, "Not a song, a welcome." She left no trace but a single footprint, already filling with dew, and so the air above Hollow Creek continues to tremble with that ancient, wordless harmony, a sound not of mourning but of waiting. It does not call the living to join the dead, but reminds the living that they, too, are part of a song that began long before them and will continue long after. All it asks is that we listen, not with our ears, but with the quiet places inside us that remember what it means to belong. In the end, the horror is not in the graves, but in the silence between them, the silence of those who walk away, who cannot bear the beauty of such devotion, who fear that to listen too closely is to hear their own loneliness echo back. And yet, on certain mornings when the world is hushed and the heart is open, the melody rises, not from the earth, but from the space between breaths, and for a moment, everything is whole again. There are echoes that do not fade with distance, but grow clearer the deeper one ventures into solitude. Hollow Creek, once a mere anomaly in the cartography of rural unease, has in the last 2 decades become something far more elusive, a threshold not of place, but of perception. Those who return, whether drawn by grief, curiosity, or a nameless yearning, speak less of ghosts than of recognition, as though the croft does not haunt, but remembers them. This shift, subtle yet profound, marks the final evolution of the Thorne mystery. No longer a tragedy to be solved, but a resonance to be entered. And it is in this liminal space between witness and participant that the story finds its most unsettling truth. Not in what happened in 1882, but in what continues to happen, quietly. In the interstices of ordinary time, the turning point came not through discovery, but through surrender. In 2011, a collective of sound artists and psychoacoustic researchers, calling themselves the Still House Project, petitioned the Wiltshire Heritage Trust for permission to conduct a non-invasive study of the site. Their aim was not to extract data, but to listen, truly listen, in the manner of meditators or mourners. They arrived not with drills or probes, but with contact microphones, geophones, and open ears. For 7 nights, they sat in silence within the U-circle, recording not only sound, but the physiological responses of their own bodies, heart rate, skin conductance, brainwave patterns. What they found defied categorization. The acoustic signature of the site remained consistent, a 4-part harmonic drone, but their biosensors revealed something extraordinary. When the melody was present, their neural oscillations began to synchronize, not only with the sound, but with each other. Their brainwaves aligned in theta rhythms associated with deep meditation, shared dreaming, and empathic bonding. One participant later wrote, "It wasn't that we heard the Thornes. It was that for a moment we became them, not in identity, but in unity." This revelation reframed everything. The graves were not containers of the dead, but conduits of connection. The ritual Elias Thorne enacted was not an act of madness, but of radical intimacy, a final, desperate attempt to preserve the one thing modernity relentlessly fractures, the unbroken presence of family. In an age of dispersal, of letters lost in transit and voices drowned in noise, the Thornes chose enclosure, silence, and song. They did not seek immortality for themselves, but continuity for their bond. And in doing so, they may have stumbled upon a forgotten truth, that consciousness, when woven tightly enough through love and attention, can imprint itself upon the world like a tuning fork struck once and left to vibrate in still air. The Still House Project published no papers. Instead, they left behind a single installation in a disused chapel near Devizes, a room lined with felt and copper wire where visitors could sit and hear a filtered version of the Hollow Creek resonance. Most emerged weeping, though they could not say why. One elderly man, upon exiting, whispered, "I heard my mother's hands." A teenage girl claimed she felt her estranged brother's breath on her neck. The chapel was shuttered within a year, not for lack of interest, but because too many people stayed too long, refusing to re-enter a world that felt suddenly thin and discordant by comparison. Meanwhile, the croft itself grew quieter, not in volume, but in accessibility. Locals began to speak of the listening days, periods in late October when the air thickened and the usual birdsong ceased, as though the land itself were holding its breath. During these intervals, electronic devices malfunctioned. Phones lost signal, cameras produced static, and digital recorders captured only the soft hiss of empty tape. Yet analog instruments, tuning forks, piano strings, even wine glasses, would hum faintly when placed near the graves, as though responding to an inaudible call. A retired organist from Bath, visiting on such a day, placed a single A440 tuning fork on the central mound. It vibrated for over 3 minutes, far longer than physics allows, its tone subtly shifting mid-decay into a minor third, the exact interval that opens the Thorne melody. This phenomenon led Dr. Miriam Cho, a neurologist specializing in auditory memory, to propose a radical theory that the Hollow Creek resonance operates not as sound, but as a form of temporal echo, a standing wave in the fabric of lived experience. She suggested that intense emotional states, when shared by multiple individuals in a confined space over time, can create what she termed chronosonic imprints, ripples in subjective time that persist beyond the moment of their creation. The Thorne household, she argued, had become so saturated with mutual attention, with the daily rituals of shared meals, music, and quiet evenings, that their collective presence had etched itself into the local space-time continuum. The graves were not the source, but the anchor, the focal point where that imprint was strongest. To stand there was not to hear the past, but to step into a fold of it, however briefly. Cho never visited Hollow Creek. She died in 2018, her notes unfinished. But her hypothesis found unexpected corroboration in the testimony of a young boy from Swindon who wandered onto the croft during a school outing in 2015. Separated from his group, he sat beneath a yew tree and fell asleep. When found hours later, he was unharmed, but insisted he had dreamed awake. In his dream, he said, he was a girl with braids, sitting at a piano that played by itself. He described the wallpaper, faded rose with ivy trim, the smell of beeswax and bread, and the way the light slanted through the east window at 4 in the morning. None of these details had ever been published. When shown a reproduction of the Thorne family's lost drawing, the one with the moon-eyed figures, he pointed to the smaller girl and said, "That's me when I'm quiet." His parents, alarmed, moved away soon after. The boy never spoke of it again. Such incidents, rare but persistent, have given rise to a quiet subculture of listeners, people who make pilgrimage not for answers, but for alignment. They do not bring cameras or notebooks. They bring silence. And in that silence, something stirs. Not a voice, not a vision, but a sensation of being known, of being held within a circle of attention so ancient and complete that it feels like coming home. This is the true legacy of Hollow Creek. Not a curse, not a haunting, but an invitation to remember that we are never as alone as we believe. That the bonds we forge in life may echo longer than we dare imagine. Yet with this beauty comes a warning, whispered not in words but in the hollowness some feel upon leaving. Those who listen too deeply often struggle to return to the noise of ordinary life. Relationships falter. Conversations ring false. The world seems brittle, fragmented, lacking the deep hum of true connection. One woman, after spending a single night at the Croft, divorced her husband of 20 years, saying only, "I remembered what silence with someone feels like." Another man gave away all his possessions and moved into a hermitage in Northumberland, where he now sits each dawn facing south as though still tuned to a frequency only he can hear. The land itself seems to guard its secret. In 2020, a developer attempted to purchase the surrounding acreage for a wellness retreat. The paperwork stalled inexplicably, deeds misplaced, surveys invalidated, title chains broken by gaps no solicitor could explain. On the morning the final offer was to be signed, every document in the solicitor's office was found damp with condensation, though the heating had been on all night. The scent of lavender filled the room. The deal was abandoned. Today, Hollow Creek exists in a state of gentle defiance. It does not advertise its mystery, it waits. And those who come must come empty-handed, hearts unclenched. The graves remain unmarked, the house a skeleton of beams and ivy, yet the air above them thrums with a quiet insistence that love, when absolute, refuses to be unmade. That to be together is not a moment, but a condition, one that can be sealed in earth, sung into silence, and carried forward on the breath of anyone willing to listen. On the most recent October dawn, a mist so fine it seemed woven from memory itself curled through the yews. No one was there to witness it, no pilgrim, no researcher, no child lost in dream. And yet, if one had been, they might have noticed something new, not 4 graves but 5. A small mound, barely raised, nestled between the 2 girls' plots, as though a 5th presence had finally been welcomed into the circle. The earth was warm, and from it rose, faint but clear, the same old melody, now with a 5th voice, soft and new, singing not in harmony but in homecoming, and so the song continues, not as lament, not as warning, but as a lullaby for the lonely. A promise whispered in the language of roots and resonance. You are not gone until you are forgotten. And here in this quiet place no one is ever truly forgotten. They are only waiting for you to remember how to listen.